Katie Logan, ambition has never been about conquest alone. It has always been about reclamation of identity, of voice, of a legacy long overshadowed by larger names and louder egos. With the backing of Bill Spencer, she begins envisioning Logan Fashion House not as a boutique extension of family pride, but as a full-scale contender in an industry ruled for decades by entrenched power. Bill's support is pragmatic, financial, and strategic, yet Katie's drive comes from something more personal. She wants Logan Fashion House to stand on its own merit, not as a reaction to Forrester dominance, but as a declaration that innovation does not belong to one bloodline alone. To achieve that, she knows the brand must be anchored by a creative force whose name alone commands respect. The realization that follows is as daring as it is controversial. If Logan Fashion House is to compete on equal footing, it must recruit not just talent, but history itself. Katie's thoughts turn inevitably toward Eric Forrester, a man synonymous with couture excellence, whose designs shaped generations of fashion and whose vision defined an empire. Eric's recent withdrawal from the creative forefront, framed publicly as retirement, has never convinced those who understand him. Creativity, for Eric, has never been a profession. It is a necessity, a language through which he understands the world. Katie senses that beneath his calm acceptance of stepping aside lies a restless hunger, a desire to prove that his genius did not expire with age or transition. The invitation, when it comes, is delivered not as provocation but as respect. Katie does not appeal to rivalry or resentment. She speaks to Eric's soul as a designer, acknowledging his legacy while offering him something he has been denied since leaving the helm of Forrester Creations: absolute creative freedom. At Logan Fashion House, there would be no shadows of succession, no internal politics diminishing his authority. There would be only fabric, form, and the challenge of building something bold from the ground up. For Eric, the offer lands like an echo from his earliest days in fashion, when ambition was unburdened by expectation and creation felt limitless. Eric's internal struggle is profound. Loyalty has always been his compass, and Forrester Creations is not merely a company. It is his life's work, his family's identity, his name etched into every seam of its success. Yet retirement has left him feeling diminished, reduced to a symbol rather than a force. Watching from the sidelines has cost him more than he admits. The idea of returning to the cutting table, of shaping silhouettes that challenge and redefine modern couture, reignites something dormant within him. The question is not whether he can still do it, but whether he has the right to want more after stepping away. Days of contemplation follow, marked by moments of doubt and flashes of clarity. Eric considers the meaning of legacy, questioning whether it is preserved by remaining static or by continuing to evolve. He recognizes that his presence at Logan Fashion House would be interpreted as betrayal. Yet he also understands that stagnation is its own kind of betrayal. To oneself, to creativity, to the art that gave his life meaning. In accepting Katie's offer, Eric would not be rejecting his past, but expanding upon it, proving that vision is not confined to a single house or surname. When Eric finally accepts the position of chief designer at Logan Fashion House, the decision is made with resolve rather than defiance. He commits himself fully, determined to elevate the brand into a powerhouse defined by innovation, craftsmanship, and fearless design. For the first time in years, he feels alive in a way that transcends nostalgia. The studio becomes a sanctuary of possibility, where ideas flow unrestrained and the future feels tangible. Eric is no longer a legend resting on history, he is an architect of what comes next. The news spreads rapidly, igniting shockwaves that reverberate throughout Forrester Creations. What might have been dismissed as rumor solidifies into fact, and the reaction is immediate and visceral. Employees whisper, investors speculate, and long-standing alliances tremble under the weight of disbelief. The idea that Eric Forrester would align himself with a rival brand feels inconceivable, almost sacrilegious. Yet the truth stands undeniable. The founder has crossed the divide, and the balance of power has shifted. For Ridge Forrester, the revelation cuts deeper than professional rivalry. It feels personal, an emotional rupture that challenges everything he believed about loyalty and inheritance. Ridge interprets Eric's decision not as a search for fulfillment, but as a direct confrontation, an implicit judgment on his leadership and creative direction. The sense of betrayal hardens quickly into anger. To Ridge, Forrester Creations is not merely competing with Logan Fashion House. It is defending itself against an internal fracture turned external threat. His father's choice transforms the impending rivalry into a war of legitimacy. Tension escalates as both houses prepare for the inevitable clash. Fashion becomes weaponized, every sketch a statement, every runway an assertion of dominance. Logan Fashion House, energized by Eric's presence, positions itself as the future. Bold, disruptive, unafraid to challenge tradition, Forrester Creations responds with renewed ferocity, determined to prove that legacy cannot be dismantled by defection. The industry watches with anticipation, aware that this competition is about more than garments. It is about authorship, about who has the right to define couture's next era. Within the Forrester family, the divide grows impossible to ignore. Eric's choice forces each member to confront their own values, their understanding of loyalty, and their vision for the future. Some view his move as courageous, a refusal to fade quietly. Others see it as an unforgivable affront that undermines the very foundation he built. Conversations once rooted in shared purpose now bristle with resentment and uncertainty. The family, long unified by a common enterprise, finds itself fractured by competing interpretations of legacy. As the first major runway showdown approaches, anticipation thickens into something almost combustible. Both houses understand that the outcome will redefine the fashion hierarchy of Los Angeles. Victory will not merely secure market share, it will validate a philosophy. For Eric, stepping onto the battlefield opposite his own name is bittersweet, yet he does not waver. He believes that creation, not allegiance, defines a designer's worth. For Ridge, the stakes are existential, a test of whether the house can survive its founder's departure without losing its soul. In the end, the conflict between Logan Fashion House and Forrester Creations becomes a mirror reflecting the cost of ambition and the price of reinvention. Eric's decision reshapes the industry, but it also reshapes the family he leaves behind. Whether this rivalry ends in triumph or tragedy, one truth remains unassailable: fashion, like legacy, is never static. It is forged through risk, sustained by vision, and defined by those brave enough to choose evolution over comfort, even when the cost is everything they once held sacred. When Thomas Forrester steps fully into his role as the newly appointed lead designer at Hope for the future, the shift is not immediate chaos, but something far more unsettling. Order imposed with surgical precision. At first, his changes appear logical, even admirable. He reorganizes workflows, accelerates production timelines, and introduces design concepts that command attention in the room. His confidence is undeniable, his talent indisputable. Yet beneath the surface of efficiency lies an unmistakable undercurrent of control. A growing tendency to move unilaterally, to make decisions that reshape the brand's identity without the collaborative dialogue that once defined it. What begins as leadership slowly reveals itself as dominance. For Hope Logan, the transformation is disorienting. Hope for the future was never meant to be a vessel for one person's ego or redemption arc. It was built on intention, empathy, and a belief that fashion could reflect values rather than overwrite them. Hope senses almost immediately that something fundamental is changing, though she struggles at first to name it. Meetings end without her input. Designs are approved before she sees them. Messaging shifts subtly but decisively, moving away from inclusivity and emotional resonance toward a sharper, more provocative aesthetic that feels foreign to the line's original purpose. Each small exclusion chips away at her authority, not loudly enough to spark confrontation, but persistently enough to erode her confidence. Thomas justifies his actions with professional language that leaves little room for rebuttal. He speaks of market relevance, brand evolution, and creative risk, framing his vision as necessary progress rather than personal ambition. In his mind, hope for the future is stagnating, constrained by sentimentality and caution. He believes he is rescuing it from irrelevance, and perhaps, in some darker corner of his psyche, rescuing himself in the process. Control becomes synonymous with clarity, and collaboration begins to feel, to him, like interference. He does not see himself as manipulating Hope. He sees himself as leading her toward a future she is too afraid to claim. Hope, however, feels the weight of that future pressing down on her chest. The more Thomas asserts himself, the more she is forced into a defensive posture she never wanted. She finds herself rehearsing arguments she once assumed she would never need to make, questioning decisions she once trusted would be shared. The pressure is not merely professional, it is deeply personal. Thomas's presence carries history, emotional complexity, and unresolved dynamics that blur boundaries Thomas insists are purely professional. Hope begins to recognize a familiar pattern, one where admiration quietly mutates into entitlement, where partnership becomes possession under the guise of support. The line between creative leadership and personal manipulation grows increasingly thin. Thomas begins framing disagreements as misunderstandings rather than differences of opinion, subtly reframing Hope's resistance as insecurity or fear of change. He positions himself as the stabilizing force, the visionary willing to make hard choices, while Hope is cast, gently but persistently, as the emotional counterweight that must be managed. The irony is not lost on her. The brand built on empowerment is becoming the stage for her own marginalization. She feels watched, assessed, and guided in ways that strip her of autonomy while claiming to protect her. Internally, Hope wages a quiet war. She questions whether her discomfort is rooted in ego or intuition, whether she is resisting growth or defending her identity. Thomas's talent complicates everything. His designs are strong. His instincts are often right. Public response begins to validate his direction, making it harder for Hope to articulate her unease without sounding obstructive. Yet success does not erase the cost. Each victory feels hollow when it is achieved through silence rather than consent. Hope senses that if she yields now, the line will no longer belong to her in any meaningful way. And worse, she may no longer recognize herself within it. As Thomas's grip tightens, his motivations become more difficult to separate from his emotional investment. Control over the brand starts to mirror control over the narrative of his redemption. His growth, his place in Hope's life. He believes that proving himself indispensable professionally will inevitably bind Hope to him. Personally, not through force, but through reliance. This belief, unspoken yet powerful, drives him to push harder, to consolidate influence before doubt can destabilize his authority. He frames his actions as protection, but protection that does not ask permission is indistinguishable from confinement. Hope's breaking point does not arrive in a dramatic explosion, but in a moment of quiet clarity. She realizes that compromise has slowly become capitulation, and that her silence is being mistaken for consent. The fear that once kept her cautious gives way to resolve. She understands now that maintaining peace at the expense of her voice is not leadership, but surrender. The brand cannot survive as a reflection of empowerment if its founder is reduced to a symbol, rather than a decision maker. Hope begins preparing to reclaim her role, not by undermining Thomas's talent, but by asserting boundaries he has systematically erased. The confrontation she envisions is not about winning, but about naming the truth. She plans to challenge the narrative Thomas has constructed, to separate professional collaboration from emotional leverage. She knows the risk is significant. Exposing the imbalance could fracture the team, destabilize the line, and provoke retaliation from a man unaccustomed to being challenged by her. Yet the alternative is worse. Allowing Thomas to continue unchecked would mean accepting a future where her vision exists only at his discretion. As the tension reaches its peak, Hope for the future stands at a crossroads. The line itself becomes a symbol of the conflict it embodies. Torn between innovation driven by control and creativity grounded in shared purpose. Thomas and Hope face each other across a widening divide, each convinced they are acting in the brand's best interest, yet driven by vastly different definitions of success. One seeks mastery through dominance, the other through authenticity. One believes control ensures survival, the other that autonomy ensures meaning. In the end, the struggle is not simply about fashion or authority, but about identity. Hope must decide whether she is willing to risk everything she built to protect the values that inspired it. Thomas must confront whether his need to shape the world around him stems from vision or from fear of losing relevance, love, and control. Whatever the outcome, Hope for the future will not emerge unchanged. It will either become a testament to reclaimed agency or a cautionary tale of how ambition, when untethered from consent, can quietly dismantle the very ideals it claims to advance.